Still today from my last video, but I wanted to just follow up on my video on suicide ideation with a video on toxic loser syndrome. It was at the stage of coming up close and personal with the sensation of extreme loneliness, increasing isolation, and a serious feeling of despair that brought me to the place of really researching more intently this phenomena that a lot of people around the world are experiencing, being what's the point of my burnt toast existence. So I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek. There is possibly a divergence here, as I see it, between people who are emotionally overwhelmed to the point of wanting to commit suicide, and then there is a suicide ideation group where you are running on empty but you haven't quite finished your tank. So it's thinking in a way of the future where you might consider yourself to be absolutely a moldy potato taking up water and sunshine unnecessarily. So for me, I would like to just work with this suicide ideation category of people who are really stuck in their thinking. The reality of their situation is actually much more hopeful than what they give themselves credit for in that moment, not discounting the horribleness of that experience at all. So toxic loser syndrome is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way to describe yourself when you are having mental health issues. And in my previous video, I recommended to people who are really up against the wall of not wanting to exist. I gave them the suggestion that if they can do one small thing for themselves, it would be to increase their vulnerability with one or two key people in their lives. Like really lay it out, lay yourself bare. Today, toxic loser syndrome. So toxic loser syndrome is about a feeling of deep internal shame, and this is something that is a global pandemic again, that we have to, as a compassionate and evolving species, learn to recognize and help people with, or at least not exacerbate that feeling for them. So toxic loser syndrome is deep internalized shame that you are failing at life. And it's a comparative experience. You'll look around at people next to you or on social media and you'll think, how the heck are they managing to keep that together where I feel like my life is just one big freaking scramble? And that comparison in and of itself is shaming. So we have two types of shame. We have externalized shame and we have internalized shame. Toxic loser syndrome concerns itself with internalized shame. The difference being your thought processes attached to that feeling of internalized shame. And that is it's just such a discomforting feeling, and it just sits with you like depression and anxiety. It's very closely, obviously, related to depression and anxiety, because when you're experiencing internalized shame, you will inevitably have experiences of depression, increased isolation, increased social disconnection, and increased feelings of self-doubt and therefore anxiety. It's a normal repercussion. I want to draw attention to the fact that internalized toxic shame is something that it is neurobiological, oftentimes engendered in childhood, where we've had experiences or caretakers that might have been less than compassionate towards us at a very important developmental time for us. So somehow we end up, and I'm saying we because I have definitely experienced this myself, and I'm wrestling my way from that neural biological thought process, because it's not the truth. That feeling of unworthiness or unlovability is what is internalized. External shame comes from someone patronizing you or looking down their nose at you or having an emotional outburst and swearing at you. Those are all externalized shames. Internalized shame is much harder to deal with because it's about how you view yourself as unlovable or unworthy. It develops a bit of what's called shame proneness, and this shame proneness is what facilitates the negative bias that we take on, whereby we filter the world through this shame-based experience, and it colors everything. I'd like to differentiate between, at the moment, negative, unhealthy emotions and unhealthy negative emotions and healthy negative emotions. So I'll get onto that in my next video, but there is a difference, and the ability to traverse the terrain of toxic loser syndrome requires us to understand shame, why we should really steer clear of ever saying to somebody you should be ashamed of yourself. We've got a very shame-based society in South Africa, but we'll get onto that another time. So firstly, be careful of the dialogue that you use to interact with people. Don't use the word, if you can, actually even be conscious of yourself using the word shame. So we always say in South Africa, oh, shame, or shame for him, or shame, I feel so sorry for him, or we've got to cut that out. It's creating a shame-based society. But also don't say things to people like you should be ashamed of yourself. But an example of a negative unhealthy emotion is resentment. An example of a positive negative emotion would be regret. I regret the fact that my life has not amounted to what I thought it would. I regret the fact that I'm divorced. I regret the fact that I have had these shame-based thinking processes that have colored my life. Those are positive negative emotions. It sounds contradictory, but they serve to propel you forward. So cover a little bit of those emotions in the next video. I have someone knocking at my door, which is a bit unfortunate, so I'll be back.